Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. Let me start it off this way. In the cracked sidewalks of Massachusetts politics, where ballot dreams go to die under the boot of backroom deals, two strange and stubborn prophets refuse to swallow the corporate acid trip being peddled as reform. Morey and Graham Moore didn't come dressed as lobbyists or polished policy wonks. They came like guerrilla gardeners, ripping weeds out of a poisoned soil, with the audacity to name the rot for what it was: dark money masquerading as medicine, nonprofits laundering hope through the spin cycle of campaign finance law. Picture it: Boston Commons at midnight, the ghosts of Sam Adams and Timothy Leary shoulder to shoulder, puffing resinous smoke, muttering that the revolution never ended, it just got lost in the spreadsheets. Morey and Moore stand in that lineage, part whistleblower, part psychonaut, part PhD level forensic accountants of corruption's underworld. They are the inconvenient voice at the bus stop, the ones muttering gospel while the crowd pretends not to listen, only to realize later that every word was true. Jamie and Graham, thank you for being here today. How are you?
We're okay. Thank you so much, George, for having us. That was an amazing introduction.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. I'm super stoked to finally get to talk to you, and I'm grateful for all the work you guys have been doing over there. And thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, nice. Well, I've put out some stuff to my audience in the Discord, and I'm excited to get moving here. So I just want to maybe we should flesh it out a little bit. Can you guys, Jamie, can you give me a little bit of background on what you guys have been doing with Yes on 4 and kind of like where people are at, so my audience may know exactly what you guys have been working on?
So together, Graham and I worked on the Yes on 4 campaign. We actually were connected previously through a grassroots psychedelic org, but we worked together on the campaign. Worked very hard to get that passed. Saw a lot along the way that was problematic. And after the really disappointing failure of the ballot question, started digging in, asking ourselves what went wrong. There were things that we had seen at the time that were problematic, but, Graham, especially Graham, spent a lot of his time digging through old emails, old campaign emails to try to, put together a picture of what really happened in addition to what we knew had happened. Came up with some, I'll let him speak to the details, but came up with some, problematic information, and we just felt like we needed to get it out there and have the truth about what happened in Massachusetts that caused this ballot question to fail, to be known to the people of Massachusetts and the psychedelic community at large, because it is really important. And this failure hurt a lot of people and was we think avoidable. So I'll let Graham add his piece.
I'll just briefly say for the audience who maybe doesn't have much familiarity. So question 4 was a ballot measure last year that would have very expansively decriminalized personal use of plant-based psychedelics. So including magic mushrooms, containing psilocybin. It would have allowed people to grow, possess, share, and use these substances in their homes with practically no restrictions, which, depending on who you are, that was either really great or not so great and scary. And in addition to that, in sort of a somewhat contradiction in a way, it would have created a very highly regulated commercial industry of psychedelic therapy centers, where you'd have to come in and be monitored by regulated professionals in order to access it. Sort of in the above ground, but so that was what happened. And the other thing I wanted to make sure to emphasize is that we're not just asserting that this failure hurt people. After the thing failed, we received outreach from people who were looking to still use psychedelics to help themselves, and of course now that continued to be illegal with all the various issues there. And in addition to that, Jamie and I and some others helped this veteran in Massachusetts who was charged for possession of psilocybin that he was using to treat his diagnosed PTSD. And that had just derailed his life, this charge. And we are very grateful to everyone involved. After our advocacy, they let him go with a continuance without a finding, I think, which basically means he has like a 6-month, very, very easy probation. And then if he doesn't get in any trouble, it'll just be dropped, like he was never charged. But it was very stressful for him and his family. And again, he was one of the lucky ones. So,
Right.
this criminalization is a big problem. And now we're in this tough position since this failed politically.
Nice. So let me ask you guys this. Looking back on Yes on 4, what do you believe was the fatal flaw? Not policy, but strategy or ethics that toppled an otherwise promising campaign?
I mean, I was waiting for Jamie to jump in, but I think the fundamental failure was not taking seriously the responsibility inherent in moving this movement forward and this access forward. Because if you understand that lives are on the line and you really seriously understand that and feel that, then you're gonna work backwards from that to do things a very different way. You're gonna say, okay, we don't want to fail. We also want to get people affordable access, and then you're gonna craft a policy based on, what's the most viable thing that helps the people in the most need, does the least damage, et cetera. And I just think everything about this points to the people who they purported it to be for: veterans, mentally ill people, cancer patients. They were like the lowest priority in a lot of ways.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Jamie?
Yeah, I agree. I paused because there were so many.
Yeah.
There's so many different factors and so many different pieces to this story. I think the policy itself, as it was written, was problematic, and we can dig into that a little bit later. But yeah, I just think, like Graham alluded to, a big part of the problem was the people working on this campaign, besides Graham and I, didn't necessarily have the emotional, personal connection, and just see the desperate need for this. Graham and I both have really personal stories of why this medicine, has changed our lives and why we want it to be available for, for loved ones. And it just seems like that same passion was lacking in the campaign. Strategically, I think there was just a lot of errors made.
We don't think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry, there's a lot. Yeah, I'm like trying to figure out how deep to go.
Well, I was just gonna say, it's not really just our opinion. Like, I think that's something that we're trying to increasingly communicate. So one of the big light bulb moments for me was listening after the fact, because like Jamie, I was just hustling so hard during campaign season, so I didn't even bother to listen to this. But after Election Day, I discovered this podcast that had been recorded by one of the campaign's chief strategists, with 2 of the consultants from the campaign on it. And in that podcast, this consultant laid out like what you need to do to have a successful campaign. And then I was cross-checking that with what the consultant's own campaign had done. It didn't line up. So these 2 people who worked on our campaign said that to have a viable yes campaign, you want to measure polling at least in the high 60s. And I was like, well, wait a second. The internal polling never even came close to that. And then they also talked about how important it was to have messengers who are credible. And I knew that our polling pointed to that being, and they did too, veterans and medical providers and law enforcement. But they'd done virtually no legwork in that department for the vast majority of the campaign, as far as me and Jamie are aware. The opposition came out the gate with the Massachusetts Psychiatric Association coming out against this, but we didn't get a veterans org that wasn't Heroic Hearts, that wasn't a psychedelic org endorsing until I think it was October, Jamie, right? So if we got that endorsement in October, you'd think that these very, very highly paid consultants and team could have gotten that endorsement the previous year. And then right out the gate, we would have had the veterans org, supporting us. But everything was left to the last minute. We got a big doctor's endorsement like the week before the election. That was me. I had this not very bright idea to have a sign-on letter for medical professionals. And I say not very bright because it's so fucking obvious. Like, why didn't we do that starting the year before? Why was this an idea that Graham, political novice, was like, maybe we should do this in like September, like a month before the election? And part of me, and then I listened to this podcast and I realized this campaign was being run by people who actually are kind of smart. I don't know why they haven't been running the campaign the way that apparently they know campaigns should be run. And so when we say that there were big strategic mistakes, it's like you can take their own words and play it back and be like, okay, so you guys didn't do the things you're supposed to do to win a campaign in your own words. And you're the ones who have run campaigns for, decades or whatever. So I don't know what you want to tell us,
It makes me wonder, is it apathy or ignorance? And on some level that doesn't really matter because it happened, but is it just that was there a monetary factor and we don't really care, we just want to funnel some money over to this nonprofit? Or is it like, we never thought about that even though we're brilliant campaign strategists? What do you attribute it to?
Jamie, I want to let you talk, but can talk.
Ahead. Go ahead.
The answer is we're still trying to figure it out. I think there was some apathy. I think there might have been some conflict of interest involved. It's just hard to all parse out. And also one of the issues with the campaign is it was so kind of disorganized and had these different groups. So there was the consulting company involved, Dewey Square Group, and kind of their sphere. Right. And then there was the New Approach, Super PAC, 501c4, out of state psychedelic lobbyist crew, and they were different. And and behind the scenes, they were sniping at each other until shortly after Election Day. And this was another thing that made me and Jamie suspicious and also upset was, both sides were sniping at each other all election, kind of blaming each other for different issues. But then as soon as it actually failed, and it was after the fact, very quickly they closed ranks. And all of a sudden we were the problem. There had we were told there really was no issue. Everything was really done well. Go away now. And, that conflicted with what they've been telling us all year. So it seemed like maybe the different groups, including us, like the grassroots folks, kind of had different interests. Maybe the donors had different interests. The whole thing seemed just very disorganized. And Jamie spoke to a few donors after the fact who were not happy and seemed to be kept out of the loop. So again, I think there were maybe some donors who were more plugged in, some who weren't. So I think there was just a mismatch of different motivations. But one notable conflict of interest was that the head of the PR strategy of the campaign was lobbying this department of the Massachusetts government on behalf of a health information tech company. And simultaneously, in this department of the Massachusetts government, on the commission, evaluating information technology, was a Compass Pathways board member. So Compass Pathways, for people who don't know, is a company advancing psilocybin as a pharmaceutical drug. So they stand to lose considerable money if psilocybin becomes cheaply and widely available. And the other thing that this company that our PR person was lobbying on behalf of, this tech company, worth way more than the ballot question. They're not publicly traded, I don't think, but we're talking huge government contracts to manage mental health systems. Probably worth at least tens of millions of dollars, if not considerably more. So, the 10 million, 8 million budget of the campaign is peanuts compared to Compass Pathways, valued at over 300 million, this non-psychedelic mental health information technology company seeking government contracts worth, tens of millions at least, but probably above 100 million. So I'm not saying that intentionally, right, the thing was thrown, but there was this incentive, this conflict of interest where this person was trying to get presumably some kind of contract or some kind of thing from this entity where a person on the board, an influential person on the board, would not, had a financial interest in this campaign not going well, or at the very least, sort of the language not emphasizing that psilocybin is safe and can be widely available. Because that was a big problem me and Jamie had, is that even though the language that these experts put on there was like the most extreme decriminalization you could possibly imagine, they didn't want to talk about it. And they were always emphasizing how scary these things were, kind of, and that's why we need all this regulation around the care. But as a result, they were kind of running their own opposition because their messaging kept emphasizing how these things are really, really intense and really risky, but they were trying to sell something that the implicit premise was they're not that dangerous, and that's why you can grow, an infinite amount in your house and give it away to anybody you want. So, that was a problem.
The public education piece was really lacking. And we were told to avoid certain topics. We were told, explicitly to pivot away from home cultivation, which was a problematic piece of this legislation from the start that needed a lot of education. We were told for a long time to pivot away from decrim, which doesn't make any sense, as Graham explained, because it was such a big piece of this bill. We were told not to talk about ibogaine. There was just a list of things that people wanted to talk about. Microdosing. We were told to pivot away from microdosing, which is what so many people had questions about. So there was just a lot of stuff like that didn't make sense. And not doing a really robust public education campaign around this, I think, was a huge problem. We were told that you don't really start pushing on the education piece, until after in the advertising until after Labor Day, which makes no sense with early voting starting in October.
Also, I want to go back to their own words, and we're in the process of making this all public, but there was an interview, again, the public interview by one of the heads of the campaign, I think October or November, and he alludes to the internal polling showing how unpopular the home growing was. But his quote is, he doesn't make the polling numbers public, but he says, it's clear from the polling that, home cultivation is something that's really important for us to educate people about. So he says that, months before the campaign decides, let's not educate about it at all, because it's so unpopular. We just want people to not think it's there and to not really think about it too much. And so, he might have changed his mind. Everybody gets the right to change their minds, but this is their own words and their actions not aligning with their own words. And so just for your viewers to know, the internal polling, home cultivation, allowing people to grow psychedelic plants in Massachusetts, was polling at, I think, 38 or 36% support, even before they wrote the policy. So, full disclosure, me and Jamie like people being able to grow these things at home. So we're not against it on the merits. But the truth is, they knew that at baseline, that idea was fairly unpopular in Massachusetts. And, maybe some kind of home cultivation still could have flown. Maybe something just for medical patients, or maybe just a small amount. But they knew home cultivation was polling at 38%. And then the policy they wrote said, okay, this is very unpopular. Let's put the most of this we possibly can in this ballot measure. And to me, that doesn't make sense.
Man, none of it makes sense to me. It's none of it.
And there was a lot of stuff with the money that didn't make sense either.
Imagine that.
So just, we were constantly told that there wasn't enough money. There wasn't enough money for this or that. There wasn't enough money to get our ads up until, I think, the second week of October, when early voting in Massachusetts starts the second week of October.
Our ads were up late. There was that was an accepted fact on the campaign, and they blamed, not enough money. But my question is, how do you spend so much money on these super geniuses, supposedly, and they only raised something like $40,000 in the first 9 months of 2024 per the official records? It's something like that. It's under 100K. And come on, are you really trying if you raise less than 100 grand, from January to September in an election year for something like this, especially when the polling's so marginal? It was always polling either below 50% or a little bit above. So again, yeah, we had no money, but was anybody even trying to get us money? Is sort of how I feel. I would ask about fundraising periodically during the year, and I was always told that's not your problem. It's being taken care of. And then August rolls around and we're broke, and I'm worried. That's what I was told from leadership. We're worried. But again, this is a problem. It just was funny, as Jamie will back up. A strange thing was the entire time everybody was acting like the victim of circumstances. Like the New Approach folks, even though they were the ones who wrote the policy, would act embarrassed about the 12 by 12. And the consultants would act embarrassed by it, but they would blame New Approach. Like they would say, oh, we told them not to put in the 12 by 12 and so much home grow. We told them that would be a huge issue. And look, this is what happened. But again, they were it. Like, it was kind of like you're blaming yourselves, guys. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, New Approach, you hired these consultants. So if they're the problem, that's on you. And similar to the consultants, you ultimately took this job. So if you didn't think this could work, why did you take the job? Like it was ridiculous is maybe the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Or nefarious. We go back and forth because again, it makes so little sense. You're kind of like, so the conspiracy theory explanation of this, and again, me and Jamie, we don't know. It seems so absurd, but like the conspiracy version of this is the goal here was to discredit decriminalization and widespread access on behalf of pharmaceutical interests and other people who want to make money off of this. And so the idea was to take a bunch of donors who were expendable, because a lot of people held their powder on this. A lot of politicians who were close to our consultants didn't endorse. It seemed like certain people were getting the message, don't pull the trigger on this ballot question, from on high. I mean, again, this is all speculation, but you can look at the numbers and you can say who donated, who didn't, you know what I'm saying? And what a great thing, the whole time, the whole message is psychedelics are dangerous, but they can help people if they're regulated. But then you're selling a measure that says people can have them and do whatever they want with them. And then it fails. Oh, well, we know why it failed. It's because of the home grow. It's because of the decriminalization, but again, you primed this failure to happen in this dramatic way. And then after the fact, you can say, look, this isn't politically viable. We love home grow. We're really in favor, but this just can't work. Look at Massachusetts. And then you ask, well, why would they do that? Well, I think there are certain donors who care about these things, who care about home cultivation, who care about decriminalization, to their credit. But if they think it's not viable, they won't insist on it. So the conspiracy theory explanation would be this whole thing was set up to discredit decriminalization politically in order to unite the donor base and make it easier to push through policies that prioritize profits for a select group of people and pharmaceutical companies over the little guys and over the people who we're supposed to care about,
And it seems like that's what's happening. That this medicalized model is what's being pushed.
Through the grapevine, absolutely, New Approach has been, that's what they've been saying, that they did everything right in Massachusetts, but the policy was just too much of a stretch. They didn't know it was too much of a stretch. They thought it would win. The experiment didn't work. There's no bad intentions here. There was no real mistake except, trying too hard or whatever, like they swung for the home run and they whiffed, and that happens sometimes, but now they've learned you can't do decriminalization You can't do something like this for the foreseeable future. And so it's been a learning experience for everybody. That's kind of what they're telling people. That's what we've heard, we should say. And again, that's clearly BS in terms of like they totally messed it up, but there is a world in which they weren't intentionally trying to lose and they're just incompetent. So again, we can't really say for sure, obviously. Is it gross incompetence? Is it intentional malice? Is it apathy? Is it a combination of all sorts of things? Because again, there were so many interest groups involved, as we're telling you, that maybe some of them sabotaged it and some of them didn't. Maybe some of them weren't paying attention closely enough. Maybe some people were paying too much attention and so fucking things up. It's all a mess, and there was so little transparency. A surprising amount of dirt was left for me and Jamie to disseminate, actually. But there also is a lot that we're not privy to and we're never given access to. So,
yeah, I always feel that a coincidence is something you get when you apply a bad theory. So when I start seeing multiple coincidences come up like that, I'm like, wait a minute. But if you can pan back and see it as a win, okay. These PR firms are dog shit. No one should ever use them. Like, these guys are either incompetent or they're on the payroll for people that don't want it to happen. That's a giant win for anybody moving forward. Hey, these guys right here, they're not good. They can't even figure out how to put the best foot forward and bring someone like Heroic Hearts or bring on the doctors or go to the VFW and have some speeches there with the community. Like, okay, those guys showed their cards. And if they're really smart, they're so dumb for showing their cards that way. So I think that on some level, what you get when you don't get what you want is experience. And I think there's a ton of experience right here. So moving forward, you got to see, okay, the big guys are going to come in with their money. They're going to use flawed language in the beginning. Who starts off a campaign with like, this is very dangerous, but we want it to pass? Like, that's so transparent. Like, that is so dumb.
I do. First of all, sorry, I go on.
Yeah, go.
So again, from this pod, then I started going through other podcasts of our genius. Sorry, now I'm being a little bit mean, and I shouldn't be mean because I want to be clear. Me and Jamie are also, I think, behind the scenes. What we're hearing, again, a lot of this behind the scenes, what we're hearing is this sort of narrative of like we're disgruntled, angry, vicious people.
Of course, they're going to
vindictive people, and that's just so far from the truth.
Of
like
course.
If people were to go through all of our interactions with these people over the last year, especially me, because JB's feisty, but especially me, it's like I'm just kissing their ass, complimenting them, playing along to get along the entire time because that's the sort of person I am, Yeah. And I still I'm not a kiss ass anymore, thanks to Jamie and thanks to this experience, but I do still like to be diplomatic and get along with people. I mean, if all these people were to suddenly have take enough mushrooms or whatever and wake up and be ready to play on the right side, like I welcome them back. It's not, I don't have a grudge that way, but it does make me upset. So I listened to this other podcast by the same campaign consultant about a campaign that they won. And she talked about why the other campaign lost. And she explained it was because they were running a no campaign. Like it was the exact same thing that she did for us, where she said they were running a thing and then their messaging was kind of going against their own measure and it was too confusing. And that's exactly what the campaign she did for us did for our measure. So again, I'm like, again, people can be distracted. I don't know what was going on in this person's life. And they definitely had other clients. That's the other thing. This consulting firm, everybody, this was part-time for everybody, except for sometimes me and Jamie, essentially, especially sometimes me. But for everybody else, this was like very part-time. And the big wigs, New Approach, Dewey Square Group, they all had other clients and other priorities, and they always made that clear to us. Like the New Approach folks, you'd ask them about something in the campaign, they'd sound very, very busy with a lot of stuff besides your little campaign. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's what we'd get. But it's like, but again, it's your campaign. This is your thing. It's, you've asked donors to give millions of dollars to. Why is this an afterthought? Like it's insane. And also, if you're going to do something sneaky like this, why are you telling? That's the other thing. It's the disrespect of like, they weren't even criminal masterminds. They like told everything to me and Jamie. And so it's sort of like at the end of all this, making the decision to go public or not, like they didn't have us sign NDAs that lasted beyond the campaign. They put basically everything in writing, especially the new approach guy. So it was kind of like, are you like daring us to open our mouths about how poorly run this was? Because you didn't even try to hide it. You know, like, again, it was insult after injury, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, Jamie, I just keep talking and talking. You got to talk.
There's so much to this. I think it's really hard probably for your listeners to understand, because there were so many different pieces, and the financial piece, the strategic errors. It's just a big story with a lot of parts. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just there wasn't enough care taken by New Approach when they decided to come to Massachusetts and disrupt the legislation that we already had working its way through. We had an act relative to plant medicine, which was a really expansive decrim bill.
Not as expensive as the ballot question, but
true.
Expansive.
But it had bipartisan support. It was a good bill. And I think they rushed into Massachusetts without the proper support on the ground, without enough money, and just didn't put the energy into this campaign that it deserved. I just think the people of Massachusetts deserved much better than this. And I think that's the problem with people coming from out of state who don't care enough, because they're not the ones personally affected. And there were a lot of problems. And the big problem to me was after it failed, nobody wanted to honestly talk about what went wrong. There was just a weird shift and like a clamming up from all sides when we started to ask questions, which is, of course, what you should do when anything fails. When something fails, you have to figure out what went wrong to avoid making the same mistakes the next time. And we could just see they weren't willing to do that in an honest way at all. And we could see that they were going to move on to the next state and the next state after that without learning anything from what went wrong here. And that I just couldn't let happen again. I felt like people deserve to know. I felt like it would help us in Massachusetts. We needed our lawmakers to see that this didn't fail because people don't want psychedelic healing in Massachusetts. We knew that wasn't true because we had spent months talking to people all over the state who wanted this. The postmortem polling of voters in this election showed that 55% support decrim and 2/3 support therapeutic access. So, the people of the state did want something, just not necessarily what New Approach was selling, and did a bad job, in my opinion, of selling. So that's why we started to dig, was to, what can we learn? Why aren't they digging in to this the way we are to see what needs to be done differently? It was just a very strange sort of sweeping under the rug. They started, they didn't want to talk much about Massachusetts at all. And the one public conversation that Jared from New Approach did have with the Shakuna Institute, he chose Stephanie Jones from Open Circle Alliance, who supposedly wasn't involved in the campaign, to talk about what went wrong. Go ahead.
No, Jamie, I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to add.
It's just that nobody wanted to really dig in. And when we started asking very straightforward questions, the response that we got from all sides was very suspicious.
And what I also want to make very clear to people listening too is I'm not just, so first of all, there's opinions and there's facts. So Jamie said, talked about it being our opinion that there was a majority in favor of therapeutic access. Our internal polling, 38% for home grow and like 36% for home grow after the fact in the postmortem. So home grow unpopular before and popular after the campaign. Maybe that wouldn't have been the case if we'd run a better campaign, but that remained unpopular. But what remained very popular, like the whole way through, not arresting veterans for psychedelics, not arresting people using them for therapy. It just like that was polling, like letting cancer patients use psychedelics was like polling in like the high 70s. So there were parts of this that were polling in those winning ballpark areas, particularly the access for veterans and cancer patients and people with mental illness. That was polling in the high 60s and 70s, kind of consistently. While, then you get to decrim of personal use, and that's now maybe just a small majority. And then you get to the home growing for everybody, and that's unpopular. So that's a fact. And then the other thing is that after this thing failed, I especially thought, okay, it's a sunk cost. Let's try to make lemonade out of lemons here. And let's try to, new approach still has resources. The consultants still have resources and connections. Like if we tried their thing, maybe now, they'll support me and Jamie's thing, and we can, and not just me and Jamie's thing. It's not about me and Jamie, but about like, they'll support good policy moving forward. And we can kind of get a fresh start with a new team of allies who, I don't love, but like I can work with them. But then there was the final betrayal where we were talking about what to do next. And there was all this lip service about how me and Jamie would take the reins and be supported in that. And so me and Jamie were talking to people about how to pragmatically move this movement forward in this state in a way that aligned with the polling and also the needs of people. So affordability, for example. So we were talking about like a medical cannabis dispensary model, which obviously would be affordable. So you just buy mushrooms, and you wouldn't need decrim for that but you have to deal with where people are at, right? Another approach that we were interested in was decriminalizing just for people with certain conditions. Again, so it would cost the state nothing, but veterans like the one we helped would no longer be subject to issues. And again, me and Jamie are for complete decrim and full legalization, but we have to work. We're trying to be pragmatic here. But what happened was our supposed allies basically vetoed all of that. Like they sort of said, we're not supporting. Very quickly it was, we're going to support a very restrictive medical model in Massachusetts moving forward exclusively, more or less. And, if you guys want to do something else, good luck, and they weren't particularly nice about it, except in the most surface level way. And in fact, they led us on. They said they were going to help us make all these introductions, including to move decrim forward and, help us, test the waters with lawmakers. And then 2 months go by and they tell us they haven't done anything. And again, good luck keeping this issue alive and keeping decrim alive. And they did one bill, new approach, and the consultants did one bill, this medical psilocybin bill, which, by the way, me and Jamie support. Like, we're for medical access. But the fact that they did that one bill in kind of a backroom way without including us, and then sort of told us to fuck off and didn't help us with the other stuff in any substantive way, that to me said a lot. That these people are not just weren't our friends. They're not going to be our friends. They're not going to help the right policy in this state moving forward. We can't trust them to do the right thing in other states. They kind of left us with nothing. And to your point, this, in some ways, this will be positive if we get the word out. But if we don't get the word out and the same thing keeps happening, then this will just suck. So we're doing our best, but we're so grateful to you bringing us on here. So that people do know, so things can change, and this can be a real learning moment.
Yeah. It sounds like a turf war. It sounds like people already have their turf staked out. There's vested interests that are making money on the way the system is. There's political connections to bigger money. There are PR firms that come in. And like let's be honest. If you work at a PR firm, you probably have like a pretty awesome degree in language. You probably have a team around you that knows exactly what you're doing. You're not alone. It's not a lone wolf at a PR firm. Those people are competent strategists for messaging. And there's probably a reason it failed. And we are probably not privy to that information because for all we know, the campaign worked exactly like it was supposed to. Like, that's kind of what it sounds like on some level. Like, let's keep the most credible people away. We don't want them influencing. We're already 38. How do we get down to 34? Like, that's kind of what it sounds like to me was happening there. And I'm curious.
It's what it looks like to us, but we just don't want to say something that, you know what I'm saying? We just want to be very clear because we're not the crazy people they say we are. Like, we're just stating facts here and people can draw their own conclusions. You know, we certainly have drawn ours, but we don't 100% know. People can be that incompetent. People can be that apathetic. People can be that dumb, you know, unfortunately. So, you know, we don't want to assume nefarious intent. But yes, this campaign looks like it was run to the ground. It looks like it was run to the ground avoidably and predictably by people who should know better, and people can draw their own conclusions. You know, maybe they just all had better things to do. They had more important clients. This was an afterthought and not taken seriously, and this is what happened. Or maybe it was more nefarious. But me and Jamie want to be very clear, like, we're not about opinions, we're about facts, you know? And so there's polling, there's the internal comms. We don't have any NDAs. Good job, you guys.
They did intentionally keep us out of a lot too.
Of course.
So my background for the past 25 years is in survey research and strategic messaging. And we weren't included. I wasn't included in much of that at all. I was intentionally left out, which is strange. Why? You know, think you would want someone on the team. They had a plan that we weren't really a part of. And we were on the team, but not really. And there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that we were kept out of, and why.
And still can only speculate about. So one thing, George, there's so much, and I hope you don't mind how much we're talking.
Not at all.
A really key thing that I think was nefarious, again, not necessarily nefarious in the way of trying to tank it intentionally nefarious, but just not done with good intentions, was they had this pretend campaign director, the quote unquote grassroots campaign director of the campaign, who was this local veteran. And she won a lot of people over who were skeptical of their intentions, including me. Jamie never really got into it too much, but I really believed in this woman. She's very young. I mean, I think she's 29 now or something. She's younger than me. She had no political experience, no prior political experience, but she was given this 6-figure job as campaign director, grassroots campaign director. Now, honestly, you know, because I had basically no political experience, I thought that was fucking awesome, you know, and she had I used to tell people, you know, her hippie credentials are completely unparalleled, and they were. She was a conscientious objector. You know, I talked to her at length for hours about, you know, how violence is bad and war is bad and, you know, all the radical ways of improving society. And I really did feel like with her, because I was told, when me and Jamie were told, is this woman, this veteran, she's going to be, you guys might not be privy to everything, but she's going to be right there in the command center as like the heart and soul of this campaign. And I talked to her again for a few hours and was like, man, they chose the super hippie who's local, who's a veteran, like right on. Maybe the conspiracy theories aren't true. And, very quickly, it was apparent it was not what it seemed. They were keeping her out of the loop. She didn't really want to be in the loop. She was very apathetic throughout the campaign. And again, like that's her right. Not every veteran, just so everybody listening at home, you're a veteran who got healed with psychedelics. You don't owe your life to like promoting this stuff. You know, if you don't want to campaign or be an advocate, that's fine. Go live your life. Like life is for living. So she just didn't really want to be there, which again, that's whatever. But, you know, it was a real mistake to keep somebody feeling apathetic, struggling in their job in this role as basically a figurehead and puppet, which is what she ended up being. And then we've been sold this thing of we have this local great veteran who's in the command center. And then she wasn't in the command center and she wasn't a full-time organizer. You know, she was given 6 figures to be a full-time organizer, but she's working part-time. She's been called in to do press interviews with the PR person as her handler. And that's basically all she does. You know, they trot her out to donors. They trot her out to public events every once in a while, but she stopped attending like our internal, like all hands for a while, like for a couple of months.
For
She
4
took a lot of
months.
time off, and she
Yes.
tried to quit multiple times. She did quit at one point. This was all kept quiet. And again, like, you know, things don't work out. They could have let her go. They could have replaced her. They could have brought me and Jamie into the command center. But the whole point, it seems, was they wanted somebody with no political experience they could push around, who wouldn't fight back, which is exactly what she was. And so they could sort of put on a human face, a face, like, one of these serial killers, and like walk around and pretend, oh, we're one of you, like the guy from Men in Black. It's like, but in fact, there was no real human from Massachusetts running the campaign. It was, sorry, consultants are real people too. My apologies. But there was nobody invested in this issue, who was in the command center from the state. It was the consultants who are consultants, and they're mercenaries. And I think they didn't do a very good mercenary job here, but whatever. And then there were the new approach folks. But again, what I think is nefarious is they weren't honest about that. And they used Emily, sorry, that is her name, but I'm trying to avoid names. They used this veteran as a cudgel to kind of beat me and Jamie out. They'd say, our polling's very clear. People want to hear from veterans, not an OCD patient, not a mother and spouse of a veteran with 4 kids. Like, they don't want to hear from you guys. They want to hear from the veteran. So if you want to win, if you really care about this like you say you do, you'll let us keep this veteran front and center and as our star. But the issue was, again, she was not performing in the role that ostensibly she was supposed to perform, and she wasn't looking out for our interests the way we were told she would. And also they were huge hypocrites. And I'm just going on and on, George, but they said they couldn't, me and Jamie, after the election, they got us one interview with the press. And that reporter didn't even know who me and Jamie were, that we even worked on the campaign. Like, when we told her that we worked on the campaign, this reporter, who the campaign introduced us to, was like, you guys worked on the campaign? I didn't know that. Again, and they expect us to not be upset about this or to think this any kind of way. Like, that's ridiculous. They wouldn't, after the election, they wouldn't even tell this woman who they set up the interview with that we worked for the campaign. And then, but they say, this is so important that me and Jamie stay quiet because we're not veterans. But then they dump all this money into this new unproven nonprofit where Emily is on paper, the veteran is on paper one of the co-directors. But in fact, it's very clearly being run by this woman working for this defense contractor who's not even a mental health patient. Like, her thing's all about helping veterans, but she's not a veteran. She's not married to a veteran. She's not in the veteran community. Then they have this drug policy person who talks about her thing being recreational drug use and not therapeutic drug use. Those are the people they give, hundreds of thousands of dollars to during a tight election year to run this psychedelics nonprofit. This woman, this defense contractor worker, she's the one who the consultants get in the press release about this veterans bill that's signed. Not Jamie, you know what I'm saying? Who's married to a spouse who struggles with PTSD, but this woman who has no personal connection, you know what I'm saying, besides caring about the veteran community. And she's the one they'd even do some campaign promotion about her. Like, so they say, oh, me and Jamie, you can't be too public because you're not veterans, even though I've cared for a loved one who was suicidal. I've lost my best friend to suicide. Like, we have these compelling personal stories. And then they take 2 people who don't have, comparatively, again, they're real people and, have souls and matter. Like, again, we're not, but, it just isn't in line with what they say how things work. They elevate these 2 people who on paper are much less sympathetic and compelling than me and Jamie. And then simultaneously they tell me and Jamie, you got to shut up because you're not veterans. Like, it was hypocritical and this was the pattern the whole way through. Whatever they wanted to do was the smart thing to do. And if they didn't want to do it, it wasn't the smart thing to do anymore. It didn't have to be consistent. We were ants. We didn't know what we were talking about. And if we pushed back, it's because we didn't care enough and we weren't letting the experts do the winning job that they were doing.
Okay, so listen, like, think about the name New Approach. Like, just think about that as a strategy. Like, if you want to derail something, the best way to derail something would pretend to be for it and then fucking kill it. Like, their name, like the answer is in their name. Like, they were high, in my opinion. I'm just a truck driver. What do I know? But like, I love language. And if I was going to be a brilliant fucking PR firm, I would come up with something like new approach. Hey, guess what? We're for this. Let us show you how to do it. But it seems to me like, and fuck, on some way you can't get away from the brilliance of it. Like, what better way to tank a campaign than to pretend you're for it, control all the resources, get the ideal poster child that doesn't want to be there. For a fact, hey, they're a veteran, they're a conscientious objector. It's a perfect person to put in front that doesn't want to be there, and then just fucking poke them the whole way so they don't want to do it anymore. Like,
oh my, you have no idea. That's exactly
that's what happened.
Motivations, we got to speculate on the motives, but like that's exactly what they did. They burnt her out. They ignored her. They did everything they could to make her not want to do the job, and they were more than happy when she finally said, "You guys run everything and leave me out of it." And it was effed up. And
well, it also made no sense because she was not working at all. Not present, not at any of our meetings. People didn't know where she was for 4 months in the middle of the campaign. And
I wouldn't say 4 months. Sorry, I just want to be very careful. She was very detached for like a lot of the campaign, like most of 2024. But I will say she showed up. She started regularly show up to meetings again in September. There were like 2 months during the summer. Maybe it was closer to 4, but it
was. I looked at the date.
She was very out of the picture, for a while. So out of the picture that one of the senior consultants literally asked me, "I don't really know what's going on with her, so do you know what's going on with her?" And so that is true.
Collecting her full salary, and she was absent for multiple months in the middle.
Yeah, she did collect her full salary and was absent essentially for multiple months. That is correct. That is a fact.
Not performing, the duties of the job that we needed her to perform. And they were, essentially using her, still paying her, saying there wasn't enough money for anything else, but, giving her $10,000 a month, and using another veteran who stepped in and did the work that she was a lot of the work that she should have been doing for free.
Now, one thing I want to make.
What a deceitful way to ruin a 29-year-old. Like, think about that. Like, new approach. I've never spoken to them. I don't know. But if that's the case, if that is the case, man, like, how do you sleep at night? Is it just a giant amount of money and not caring about what's right for the community, not caring about the veterans in the world, not doing the right thing? Like, how do you sleep at night when you take money to ruin something like that? And like I said, I don't know, but it blows my mind to think that people are out there willing to do that. But maybe that's the world of politics.
Yeah, again, we don't want to go too much into motives because we don't know. But I
don't know either.
No, but I do want to say that like it's worse than me and Jamie are saying, because we're trying to be respectful. As everybody who knows this story, and it's a lot of people, if anybody's watching, you think the truth isn't out. The truth is very, 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 very out, but everybody's a good person and not saying everything. But like, it's worse than we're saying in terms of her treatment. But again, we're doing the right thing, and we know that they're trying to spin it, and they were trying to spin it the whole time. When we were complaining about things, they tell Emily, "Oh, they're jealous, they're snipping at your heels." So they want to make it that we're ganging up on this 29-year-old who has a right to make mistakes and live her life and has gone through a lot of trauma and deserves the best. So we're not trying to attack her. And right. Again, she was they were telling her the whole time, they were gassing her up. "You're doing great. We love you doing your part-time thing." She did what the experts, quote unquote, told her to do. She did it to the standard they told her was adequate, even though I think objectively it was not. And, and she made a bunch of money, but not that much. I mean, again, like $106K is great, but it's not like, they didn't give her $5 million. Like, she deserves to live her life and, do whatever she wants after this. Like, we're not coming after her. They'd love the narrative to be, "Oh, they're attacking this person." But that's not it. We're attacking the people who put this person in this position. That is unfortunate. Maybe she could have made 100K in something else that would have moved her career forward and not harmed her in the way this did. So yeah, I just want to be very clear that our issue is with her treatment and how they used her. We hope she has a very happy and productive life.
Of course. What do you think? Do you think that this is part and parcel? Is this sort of what, if something happens once, it may never happen again. But if it happens twice, it'll definitely happen again. Do you think that this is sort of what we're looking at on a bigger scale in the country as far as decrim or legalizing psychedelics? There's these vested interests that don't want it. Call it big pharma, call it political, whatever the big interest is. But maybe it's a good old boy network, whatever it is. But do you think that this is sort of the same thing that people are going to face in other jurisdictions?
Yes.
That was our concern.
It seems like it's already happening, and we have to be careful about what we say, but we're hoping more people share more information soon. But from what we've heard, it's already happening. And again, there's a world in which this is just people covering their asses. They're blaming decrim in Massachusetts, not because they are in a conspiracy against decrim, but because that's much more convenient than saying we're ridiculously, absurdly incompetent. But it already seems like they're using Massachusetts as a cudgel to kill decriminalization in multiple states. And that's an issue. And one thing I want to bring up, because this is something that tricked me, perhaps tricked me. I used to think, I looked at Colorado, where New Approach did pass a measure successfully. And I thought, so clearly they're the good guys. Because, Colorado, it has its issues, the centers. I know people, have issues with it. But fundamentally, in Colorado, you can get shrooms. I mean, that decrim, the infinite growing and giving away, it really works. It really works if you want people to get mushrooms, let everybody grow it and give it away. A lot of people grow and they grow a lot. They give a lot of it away. The decrim in Colorado, to me, is great. It's not perfect. And I have a lot of issues with the specifics. I would have preferred a dispensary model or whatever. But, Colorado, with all its flaws, pretty grateful for it.
Yeah.
But Colorado was never supposed to win. And I think that's really important to point out. The highest in any public poll, to my knowledge, you can look this up, like before Election Day, the most recent representative poll in Colorado showed the thing at 43%. Ours was polling at 50%, right? But the Colorado measure that New Approach advanced was at 43%. And I know somebody who spoke to people who were there on the campaign, and supposedly they all thought it was going to lose on election night. Why would they think anything else? It's a mid-year, so you don't have the same youth turnout. It's this crazy thing to let everybody grow mushrooms, and it's at 43%. And then it wins handily, 54%. And a part of me wonders if somebody was, watching the election results come in and was like, darn it, how did this, it's like the producers, how did we just unleash free the plant here when we thought we had the perfect thing here? It was polling at 43% fucking percent. It was ridiculous. Everybody can grow mushrooms and then it won anyway. And then they were like, okay, let's go to a state that's more buttoned up where this definitely will not happen again. And then voila, Massachusetts. But part of my issue is they would justify, we did this in Colorado, so we can do this in MA. But again, even if it was all with good intentions, that's insane and reckless. You don't say, okay, we were at 43% and we won on election night, even though we all thought we were going to lose. Let's repeat that. That's definitely a repeatable, replicable model. You pull in the 40s, you look like you're doing terribly, and then miraculously you win. You know what I'm saying? That's not something you say, okay, let's do that again everywhere. You say, okay, we get lucked out. Let's see if we can improve on this. Let's see if we can be polling higher, and maybe we could tweak the policy to do better, rather than just copying and pasting from Colorado in a very different state. So yeah, it doesn't make sense. I don't know if they're just horrible at their jobs or they're great at their jobs ish. Because even if the goal was to kill it, again, they were so sloppy and ham-fisted in the way they did it, and they hired me and Jamie, who actually care and aren't as dumb as they thought we were. So that's really not working out for them. So I don't know. If there's some sort of mysterious mastermind behind the scenes, my suggestion is you find different people to work for you. who are more careful and just cover up better. Because me and Jamie, honestly, if they hadn't been so ham-fisted, and again, I'm not saying there was a conspiracy, but if there was, they could have pulled this off a lot smoother, raising much less suspicion of me and Jamie if they'd just been slightly more competent at it. Because me and Jamie didn't know anything. We were novices.
Yeah.
We were naive, and we were looking for the best, especially me, we were all trying to make this work and wanted this to work because it would have been this beautiful thing, if this had passed. So,
man, I'm squarely in the camp of like decrim. Like I really think that, and I realize it's not perfect. I get it. But it just seems for so many of us on the bottom, for so many people that are struggling, and so many people that can see this sort of mushroom or this plant medicine as a way to circumvent some of the struggles, to circumvent some of the pressures, to circumvent some of the bureaucracy and heal ourselves. Like I'm squarely in that camp, but I don't, I want to, it's hard for me to move beyond good and evil. And I know it's more nuanced than that. And like, maybe that's the idealist understanding of like, hey, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. But on some level, can you guys make any cases? Like, I don't know that I can. I guess if I was going to steel man their argument, the opposite side, I would say something along the lines of, listen, we have the drugs out there right now. We have the therapy that's helping for people. And we have these nonprofits that are doing great work. We don't need this new thing to come in here and fundamentally tear that down. And that's not even a good argument for it. But if you were to steel man it in a good way, like what is the arguments of the people that are trying to keep psychedelics from being decrimmed?
I think the argument is that too wide access will hurt people. Irresponsible teenagers will get access. Kids will, 2-year-olds will get into their mom's purse and take, the psilocybin pills and have a really bad time, and maybe even worse than that. I mean, that's it. I mean, the argument against decrim is the argument against widespread access. And I think it's pretty obvious, again, in terms of the facts, that, even in the scenario where like everybody has psilocybin everywhere, most people are not going to have a catastrophic experience, especially if they know what it is and know how it works, and are educated. That said, right, I do think the more psilocybin, statistically, right, the more of those, whatever percent it is, less than 1% horrible things are going to happen, in terms of absolute numbers. And so if the concern is culturally and politically and socially, gradually integrating this in the way that's sustainable, I can understand the argument against widespread access immediately, because you just don't want a bunch of news stories of some guy chopping off their dick because they took psilocybin, or jumping on a plane and trying to take it down. These are both things that have happened. So I'm for decrim. I think, interestingly enough, Colorado does not have a lot of horror stories. At the epicenter of Free the Plant, I know bad things have happened there, but not one of these sensational things like chopping off your own penis. And again, things happen with alcohol all the time. And weed too. I love weed, but like weed causes problems too. So to me, I'm a legalize and regulate all drugs kind of guy, and definitely decrim personal use. But I think the legit argument against immediate decrim is you're going to have more accidents. It's going to be messy. It's going to scare people, and it will set things back. That's my thinking. What do you think, Jamie?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who don't believe we should have control over what we put in our own bodies.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to argue against, I think that's what's behind a lot of this. They just feel like people can't be trusted to make decisions like this for themselves. They're well informed. I don't know. I try to understand. It doesn't make sense. There's such a disconnect in the way people think about psychedelics and the way they think about alcohol. It makes no sense to me. I think we need to do a better job of understanding how these anti-decrim people, what it is that's, like, what is the real issue? How can we message it in a better way? How can we make people understand that no one should be put in jail for for using these medicines? I don't know. I think it's just a fun difference in the way some people think the medical establishment makes things safe. They're here to protect us and to regulate so that, and yes, there is a huge part of that, but none of us would be here talking about psychedelics if people hadn't been using them outside of clinical context, illegally in the underground. It's just, I ponder that all the time. How can we do a better job of really, really understanding what people's issue is with decrim? I think it's really complicated. I think there's a lot of things, but I think it's just a reflection of our society and how we outsource our physical and mental health to, paid professionals.
I was at the store yesterday, and I was wearing my Heroic Hearts t-shirt, and I was looking for some food for my family. I was picking up a salad, actually. And out of nowhere, like, someone just tapped me on the back of the shoulder. Like, it was almost like just a stealth move. I was like, oh, I turned around, and this guy was staring at me. And he paused for a minute. And it wasn't just like a regular stare. It was like that 1,000-yard stare. And there was this moment between us. And I was just looking at him, and he's like, hey, I noticed your shirt. And I'm like, I had to look down to realize what shirt I was wearing. And I'm like, yeah, these guys are doing really great work. What got your interest? And he's like, psilocybin for veterans. And I could feel the weight of his stare. And I'm like, they're doing really awesome work. And I'm like, what about it interests you? And he goes, I'm a veteran with PTSD. And I could feel the weight of his words on me, like 1,000 bricks on my shoulder. Like, I almost started tearing up because I could feel the pain. And I'm like, are you curious about it? Like, I know some people, like, would you be curious to maybe want to try it? And he goes, I've thought about it a lot, but I don't do drugs. I've never done drugs. And in that language, I don't do drugs, I could hear him calling, like, I am fucking dying inside. I need something. Nothing is working for me. Like, I felt all of that. And so we just sat and kind of stared at each other for a little bit. I'm like, what if it's not a drug? What if it's not a drug? What if it's something natural that helps? Like, I've seen people I love get better. And I know that my definition of drugs has changed. Is it possible yours could? Man, and like, it makes me want to fucking cry right now thinking about it. He was like, maybe. And he went on to tell me about being an operator, being in Iraq, being in Afghanistan, and so thankful that he no longer holds the weight of what he had to do or was told to do. And there's no escape for him. We began talking about neuroplasticity, but like, there is no new approach. There is no PR firm. There is nothing powerful. There is no government official. There is no law that could ever carry the weight of the conversation that this gentleman and I had. And that is where the change is coming from. I don't care how much money you pay a PR firm. Like, that is getting out there. Those are the stories that are be told in the community. If I had that conversation with him at a VFW, and those conversations are happening all the time, they're happening in your circle, Graham, Jamie, they're happening in your circle. That is the real fundamental change that happens in the underground that cannot be stopped. And like, when I look at these things that are happening on these, whether it's a corrupt case or it's a nonprofit that's trying to sway the election, like, the real election is happening in the underground to each one of us. Like, we are changing it on some level. So if I could turn it that way just for a minute, there's no stopping the underground. Mycelium grows underground, and only every now and then, when the conditions are right, does the mushroom come above board. So like, I just want to put that out there as something positive. Like, there's no stopping it. Decrimmed or not decrimmed, these medicines are here for all of us, and they're a birthright for us, and they're going to change the way we move in society. They're going to dissolve the boundaries out there. So I wanted to put some of that positivity out in there.
No, that's awesome.
There's no stopping us.
But I want to answer that positivity with negativity. No, I think that's beautiful and great and true. And
put
I
it out
think
there, yeah.
And and that's definitely something especially Jamie has experienced. She had so many conversations. And Jamie, maybe I'll pass the mic to you and have you talk about that a little bit.
Yes,
but I first want to say I want to get on my soapbox and say one of my issues.
Let's hear it.
So I am very frustrated with what I consider to be the hypocritical and not factual way that so many in the psychedelic community talk about psychedelics, even in the underground, or sort of in the underground, but especially, when communicating with outsiders. There's so much focus on how intense and strange and weird these things are, and how, they're so important to be used responsibly. And by the way, I'm not here saying don't use psychedelics responsibly, but then you actually talk to these people, like the New Approach folks behind the scenes, or the doctors behind the scenes. Sorry, not all the doctors. There's some people who are good. I don't want to be. Some people actually the doctors, the good doctors in Massachusetts. I have no problems with them. The ones I've talked to, they're cool. They're not hypocritical. But there are people who they'll be all about regulation and everything publicly, but then you talk to them privately, and they're doing the most ridiculous, irresponsible shit. And they're getting away with it because the drugs aren't that dangerous. I was talking to these people who were involved in something and trying to be, really above board publicly. And then they were telling me about this wild experience they had where a friend had a psychotic break on mushrooms, and they were scared and they were all tripping together and they hadn't really prepared for it at all. And then I asked, well, what happened after? And they were like, oh, he was totally fine. There's been no issue. And again, that's so typical. Statistically, I'm not, let's say this, the what information is available out there suggests that a lot of people are not using psychedelics responsibly. Okay. When I talk to people who use psychedelics, the typical person in that category, and myself included at times in my life, have used them in ways that the medical establishment would say was profoundly irresponsible and dangerous. But the vast majority of us, the experience is, no matter how bad it is, after 6 hours or whatever, you're back to normal. And again, that's not the case for everybody. I do believe people cut their dicks off and get up in a hospital, and that's bad, and we want to avoid that. But that happens with other things too. That happens with prescription psych meds. That happens with alcohol. That happens with cannabis. There are these freak things that happen, or not even freak things, just rare things. But psychedelics are actually astoundingly safe, in my view, for what they do. You can have some really wild, very profoundly unpleasant experiences if you take so much in the wrong setting. But and I hate to bring this up, but in Israel, when they had that massacre and people were on psychedelics, a lot of the people who were on psychedelics actually did better. They found, the ones who are on MDMA, they have less PTSD than the people who weren't. So that was the worst setting possible. And the people who were on the psychedelics, certain ones, did better than the ones who were not. So if you can watch people get shot in front of you on MDMA and be better off than the person who wasn't on MDMA, then I don't really understand how people are talking about MDMA like it's so much more intense and dangerous than alcohol. When if you were drinking and somebody got shot in front of you, I think you were more likely to get shot or whatever. You know what I'm saying? They have danger. There's a real danger to psychedelics, and I'm not one some people to dismiss that. I don't think there's no such thing as a bad trip, and I don't think everything is just a lesson from the universe. I've seen extreme mental illness, in my community, and it's not to be romanticized. It's very scary. Jamie's seen it too, and psychedelics can help it, but it can also make it worse or cause it in some rare circumstances, and that's real and bad. But psychedelics, to me, used responsibly, are really astoundingly safe. And for me, the biggest danger with psychedelics, the thing I'm most afraid about out in the community, it's not people voluntarily taking too much. It's people, using them to hurt people. That to me is the nightmare scenario out in the community. It's not somebody accidentally taking too much mushrooms. It's somebody giving mushrooms to somebody before they give them a beating or something to make it worse. That's the thing that I worry about, in terms of widespread use. So that's just my little thing. And I wish that, people who sort of know this to be true would stop thinking that they have to pretend otherwise to like be accepted in respectable society. Just say the truth. They're not that dangerous. There are serious dangers, so they should be treated respectfully. There's a lot we don't know. There's a little bit we do. These seem to really help people. And we're still learning, and they're wonderful, and you certainly shouldn't go to jail for having them. I just wish we were all sort of on the same page, because to me, those are the facts from the knowledge we have right now,
Yeah. What do you think, Jamie?
That was a lot.
Sorry.
But yeah, I definitely think people should not be going to jail for using mushrooms or any other drug. And I hope that we can do better going forward in messaging around that. I think it's really amazing that, the American Medical Association has come out in favor of decrim, that it should be treated as a public health issue, not a criminal one. I think that's really promising to have an organization like that be willing to come forward and say that, and a lot of other ones too. In Massachusetts, the Mass Psychiatric Society that opposed the ballot question, they actually endorsed several of our decrim bills, which I think is huge. So I think, it's going to happen. They will be legalized. It's just the stories of healing, the clinical research, the evidence, it's all there. It's not a matter of, if, it's more when and how. And I'm with you. I think it has to be. I think we've got to have decrim. We have to have just a basic understanding that people should not be put in jail for using these substances or any substance. In my opinion. And I think the how really matters. And I think making these medicines accessible to the people who need them is the most important thing. Is if it's legal and you can't afford it, what good is it? So to me, that's the most important piece of all of this, is making sure that, psychedelics are for the people and they don't get overly medicalized and inaccessible to only the rich. It's capitalism tends to ruin everything. And I'll fight really hard to have that not happen here.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the end of the day in Massachusetts, and all that Graham and I have seen, and this was sort of a rambling conversation. There are a lot of facts, very well documented facts, evidence. Anything that we've said about this is something that we have written proof of, and I think a lot of that will come out in future reporting that's laid out in a way that people can understand a little bit better. But my perspective is just what happened here was really wrong. It was wrong for an out-of-state entity to roll into our state and make such a mess of this and really set us back. When a ballot question fails, it's a huge problem for the issue in the state. The prevailing wisdom is it sets you back like 10 years because legislators don't want to touch it because they feel that the people have spoken. So this was a huge deal. This was a huge deal for the people.
It was a deal nationally too.
Yeah.
Who wanted it. And for the many people, I think of the people, for me and my family, I don't mind breaking unjust laws to heal my loved ones. I'm fine with that. But there's a lot of people out there, like the guy that you talked to, I don't do drugs. I don't break the law, only do what's legal. And I think those are the people, the people who don't even know or care about psychedelics, but who could be saved by them. Like those are the people who really lose out, because those of us who are in this community, whether it's illegal or not illegal, it's like you said, there's nonprofits, there's ways to get your hands on these medicines if you're willing to break the law. But there's a lot of people who aren't and who are losing hope. Maybe we lose a lot of lives that way. And there's just, It has to end. So Graham and I feel like it was just really important for the truth to get out about what happened, so that other states, other advocates, other people could make informed decisions about, how New Approach operates or how they operated in this specific instance. And I hope that, people can do with that what they will. But I think when you read the reporting where everything is laid out and linked and you can see the emails and the texts, there's just a lot done wrong. And the people of Massachusetts lost out. And I think nationwide, people should be paying attention because it matters how we proceed in legalizing these matters a lot.
I also want to say that I think one of the issues is I used to be one of those people who didn't care about psychedelics, didn't know about psychedelics, didn't want psychedelics, was even a little bit scared of psychedelics if I even did bother to think about it.
Yeah, of course.
And the only reason why I was one of those don't do drugs people. Yeah. And it was only because I went basically totally insane, which again, I always have to be careful about saying that because, because now I'm extremely lucid, but people who want to discredit me will say I'm still insane. In fact, that has been communicated to me indirectly. That's one of the things they're saying. Like somebody who knows me and also knows some New Approach people was like, I haven't heard anything bad about you, Graham, since this happened, but apparently they're very worried about your mental health. Like your mental health is just spiraling and causing you to see all these things that aren't real about this thing. But the truth is, per my, this is getting too much TMI, but the point is I'm doing very well actually with my mental health, and being able to fight this fight is a reflection of that. But in the past, I was doing very, very badly and was desperate, and it was only thanks to a family member that I turned to psilocybin, and it really helped. And so when that happened, there was kind of this light bulb moment where this wasn't a drug issue. There was just something so much more profound, as you, George, and Jamie have said. And one thing that's frustrated me is I think so many people still have that mindset that I used to have and kind of compartmentalize all drug policy stuff as kind of unimportant to other issues. But it's really not. The mental health crisis really affects pretty much everybody directly or indirectly. I think most people can benefit from psychedelics in some way. And in terms of the story of this ballot campaign in Massachusetts last year, the reason this matters is because this sort of incompetence or at worst intentional sabotage could happen for other things that people care about. It could happen for, UBI, or it could happen, universal basic income, or it could happen for, education, for people, universal pre-K, or whatever thing is difficult that will challenge the powers that be. If you allow this kind of thing to happen, you're making it easier for it to be sabotaged. And again, maybe sabotage wasn't here, maybe it was incompetence, but even then, if you care about an issue, whether it be LGBTQ rights or anything, you have a vested interest in making sure that we don't have a system where the people who care the least about it and are the least competent are the ones moving it forward. That's a problem. And the people who worked on this campaign, they're involved in all sorts of stuff. They're not just psychedelics. Yeah. They're going to do other things. So maybe you don't care about psychedelics, but it'll be your issue next that goes through the wood chipper. So this isn't just about drug policy. This is about how our politics works. Yes. And gets corrupted potentially by vested interest, even if it's sort of incidental. Again, maybe there was no grand conspiracy. Maybe it was just everybody having other priorities and slight conflicts of interest and being apathetic and also somewhat genuinely incompetent, and it all kind of came together. But regardless, this shouldn't happen again for psychedelics, but it shouldn't happen for any issue that matters, So yeah, I think that's important to note.
It's amazing to me to get to see the way, if I were to pan way out and look at it from a giant 1,000-foot view, maybe it is psilocybin that allowed this campaign for us to see how politics works. And maybe you have to be that close to it to know the young lady that was the face of it, to know the people at New Approach that were PRing it, to understand the intricacies of it, to see, oh, well, this looks a lot like it was done on purpose. But like, once you have that clarity, and the same thing with a lot of psychedelics, like once you know, you can't unknow. And like that's a big problem for people, but it's also like the greatest asset. Like once you see how it works, you see it everywhere. So for those that have been a huge fan of your guys' work, and especially for you guys that were in it, like you can't unsee it now. Like you could call it a coincidence, but I mean, like you can't unsee the connections that were made, and just the fact that we're bringing it to light. And you guys have done so much epic work, and I'll put Jack Gorslin over there too, and Noah Daly, like these people that are shining a light on the mechanics of how the operation works. That is a giant win. Even though you don't get the outcome that you want, perhaps it's better to show the machinery. Look at this machinery. Look at how this cog fits in over here. Hey, look at this person over here doing this. And when we all become aware of that, it makes that it's like the magician. Like if you watch a magician do a trick, it's pretty impressive. But as soon as you know how the magician does the trick, you don't ever want to see it again. You're like, that guy's just conning me. So on some level, I think just bringing light to these issues is a great way to see it as a win. Even though it's not the win we wanted, it's still a huge win for people who have eyes to see.
I agree. I know I've been talking a ton, so I want to make sure Jamie says what she wants to say. But I agree. And what? Oh, darn it! You know what's funny? Jamie, you have to talk because I completely lost my thought. So
yeah, I was.
Oh no, I have it really quick. Jack Gorsline. There's so much. We're not going to get to all of it. To me, it's pretty clear in this conversation. But I want to whoever, if there is a mastermind out there, I want to know who's responsible for this whole debacle in terms of me and Jamie. I want to note, because people have been saying, oh, it's Jack in cahoots with Jamie and Graham, that months before me and Jamie joined the campaign, Jack, at New Approach's, decision to make Jack like the inside journalist. So it was a decision all the way from the top to leak Jack information about this grassroots activist that they had turned on, to leak Jack information from internal comms between them and this troublemaker. That was months before me and Jamie joined the campaign that it happened. New Approach had declined an interview with the Boston Globe and then gave an interview to Jack Gorsline, to give their first public response to this misinformation by this activist. And further, and then I'll turn it over to Jamie. When the consultant PR person from Dewey Square Group told us you can't talk to any journalist without prior authorization, including Jack Gorsline, and I'm pretty sure I have a text message, and I'm gonna make that public soon, but like it was the New Approach person who told me and Jamie, don't worry about the PR campaign's PR person. You guys can keep talking to Jack. Because New Approach, all the way from the top, thought Jack is our guy. And again, so you're upset about Jack now. You created Jack too. Like me and Jamie were. If you told us, this is a firm line. You can't talk to Jack even. I know I would have kept to that. Maybe I don't want to speak for Jamie, but I was the sort of person. This was a big break for me. I want to do everything right. I was told by the New Approach guy, you can keep talking to Jack, and Jack continued to be given scoops, and so that were authorized by the campaign. So this Jack problem also created by your wonderful New Approach geniuses. So I just want everybody to know that, who's curious, that like it's another self-inflicted whatever, is Jack, because New Approach, this campaign really helped Jack's career, and that was in large part not due to me and Jamie. We told New Approach about Jack, but it was New Approach who decided Jack's the guy we can give exclusives to, So, yeah, I just want to get that out there. Jamie, you can take over.
I'll just add, I think it's really disappointing that the response to all of this reporting that Jack Gorsline and Noah Daly and through Lucid News has done, campaign finance piece of this. The response from New Approach has basically been to discredit Jack, disparage his reputation and ours behind the scenes. There've been no one has come forward with anything to counter any of the claims that we've made. They've either not responded or said that it was just a misunderstanding over and over. We misunderstood. But there's been no attempts to clarify anything. I mean, if you're not guilty of something and you're accused of it, usually the first thing you try to do is present facts to exonerate yourself. And there hasn't been any of that. They've just, they've ignored the issue, and I tried to cast doubt on us, as people, which I think is, again, not what you typically do if you're in the right. If you have facts to support yourself, you usually come out with them. I think they're just hoping all of this goes away. But just wanted to reiterate for people when they read the reporting, there's a lot of evidence in there. It's not just us making things up because we're disgruntled, because we're not disgruntled and angry.
What do you mean? People. I'm definitely disgruntled. But I also have the truth on my side, overwhelmingly. So.
You are, yeah. But for me, anyway, it's, this was just about the truth needing to come out. And I hope that people will take the time to really, dig into this and read the facts that have already been reported and those that are coming out, which so far the reporting has been on the campaign finance violations pretty much exclusively. But, there's additional reporting coming out on some of the other issues that we talked about, just the nitty gritty of how this campaign was run or not run very well. So, just the one thing I want to reiterate is that's it. It's the truth of the situation and what really happened and what really went wrong is what was important for us to tell, and nothing personal to anyone involved. I actually have spent a lot of time racked with guilt about speaking up. I do feel like it was the right thing to do. But I'm super compassionate person, and and I know that this has caused a lot of problems for people at New Approach and people at Dewey Square that we worked closely together, and I feel badly about that, but I feel like the truth is the most important thing, and that's what we've told, and we have it in writing. We have the receipts, so I hope people will pay a little attention to what really went wrong here and take some lessons from it going forward. And we have not been about, when Graham mentioned, they were trying to keep us out of the media and the spotlight. I just also want to say that is not something that Graham and I have been vying for. I actually hate, I'm not constantly posting on LinkedIn or social media. Look at me. That's not me whatsoever. And there, just sort of attacks on our reputation and our character and our motivation have been floating around. And that's, I think, just part of it when you speak up. But I think if people take the time to really dig into this, there's a lot here that's really scandalous and well documented, and a lot of good stories that should be some good lessons for people who want to pay attention.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an important issue, and I'm grateful, and I think my listeners are too, for you guys having the courage to come out and talk about it. But more than that, to shine light on how to fix it, what's important, why you did what you did. There's probably a lot of people that are curious to find out more. So let me start with you, Jamie, and then I'll come over to Graham. Like, as we're landing the plane, like, what is it that you want people to know, and where can people, if they wanted to find you and talk to you more about some specifics, or maybe they just want to share some stories with you, where's a good place to find you at, Jamie?
Masshealing.org. Mass Healing is the nonprofit that I started with CJ LeConte, who was the veteran associated with the campaign that sort of got pulled in, but not compensated for his awesome work as another sort of spokesperson for the campaign. Yeah, him and I started Mass Healing. Graham's helped us out with that, as many other awesome people in Massachusetts have. So yeah, you can find me there. I'm always happy to, we haven't talked about this publicly a lot, but we're always happy to answer questions. It's really important to me that, you know, people know and understand the why behind this. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, talk about this to anybody who's willing to hear. I think a lot of people, I've been surprised that there hasn't been more interest in this story. I think people are maybe waiting and watching. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I know Graham does too. So, you know, feels the same way. We're willing to. Yeah. We're not going around trying to sell this story, but we're happy to talk about it. I've lost my audio or video. Sorry.
That's all right. It's all right. Graham, let's say someone's looking to learn some more, or maybe they want to follow up with some of the things you're doing. Where's a good place for them to reach out to you?
Mass Healing, although I just checked the website and I realized that we don't have our like emails up there. Like we have a form, a contact form, but we really just got to throw our emails up on the website. You know, I have a graham@masshealing.org email, and that's a great email to reach me. And Jamie has a jamie@masshealing.org email, and that's a great way to reach her. And Mass Healing is spelled MASSHEALING, you know, so it's Mass Healing just like you'd think, you know, .org. So yeah, I just think that's a great way to meet me. And in terms of takeaways, I want to echo what Jamie said about this not being about the individuals involved. And like I said, I'm angry and disgruntled, and I am, but that's because of the facts. And I do have some negative feelings about some people involved because of the way they treated me and the way they handled this campaign. But as I said earlier, if you know, if they start acting right or whatever, or apologized, or, you know, really did so, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I'd want to, you know, welcome them back, you know, like that's the lesson I learned from psychedelics, is to be very compassionate towards people. Although I used to think that's a lesson everybody takes from them, but clearly that's not. But I really, that's not just lip service to me. You know, one reason I felt good about reporting the campaign finance stuff was because the penalties are so minor. You know, like I didn't want any of these people, even the ones I'm most upset with, to be like hauled into jail. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Or like, you know, like this is, my understanding was basically there'd be an admission of guilt, you know, or something akin to that, and some sort of nominal fine for these very well-financed orgs. And it would sort of help the truth get out. But again, me and Jamie aren't like, oh, we want these people to be on the streets or whatever. No, we want them to live happy, productive, healthy, ethical lives, you know, contributing to the human race in a positive way. And that hasn't changed. And we haven't been popping off on social media. And we tried to avoid names in this podcast to emphasize that this isn't about, oh, this person was mean to me, or oh, this person sucks. And actually, I'm not going to name the name, but there's an individual in particular, you know, for the consulting company who I actually really liked and treated me with nothing but the utmost respect. And they did some stuff that I take issue with, but I blame their boss, and I really do not, you know, to the extent this has affected them adversely, that is certainly entirely incidental, because I really, really liked them. So still like them. I mean, I haven't been in contact, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Jamie, Graham, I'm super thankful that you guys are doing the work you're doing. Thank you for spending some time with me and everybody out there who's hanging out with us, and hang on briefly afterwards. But to everybody within the sound of my voice, that's all we got for today. Go down to the show notes, check out Graham and Jamie. Make sure that you get involved with things you're passionate about, and that's how we make this place a more of a wholesome community. And that's all we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a beautiful day. Aloha.